tardes a todos, a los asistentes presenciales y los online, que bueno, tenemos aproximadamente unas 40 personas, igual mal tiempo no acompaña, ¿no?, para estar presencialmente hoy aquí, pero bueno, damos la bienvenida a David Epstein. David es catedrático de la Universidad de Granada y vocal asesor de la Cartera de Servicios y Farmacia del Ministerio de Sanidad del Gobierno de España. Y bueno, voy a dejar que Rubén, ¿vale?, miembro de Galapagos, ¿vale?, la farmacéutica que al final es la que colaboramos con la Universidad de Cantabria para llevar a cabo esta cátedra, pues bueno, viene hoy en representación de la misma, ¿vale? Y nada, pues agradecer de nuevo al ponente y a Rubén su participación hoy y estar hoy aquí. Ya repito que el día no acompaña, entonces es un gran esfuerzo.
Pues muchas gracias, Paloma. Bueno, has dicho colaboración, ¿no? Pero yo creo que esto es más que una colaboración, ¿no? Es la unión de dos instituciones, dos entidades, como es la Universidad de Cantabria, con la cual estamos encantados de tener este partenariado. Y Galapagos, que es una compañía biotecnológica, pero que además de fabricar y comercializar fármacos que cambian el curso de algunas de las enfermedades, la verdad es que es una compañía que tiene una orientación también no solo hacia los pacientes, sino también hacia la divulgación, hacia la docencia, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, por eso esa unión que tenemos entre Galapagos y la Universidad de Cantabria. Y bueno, decir que estamos encantados de estar aquí una vez más en una actividad más de esta unión, de esta cátedra, y además de tenerla en un tema que creemos que es tan importante como es la evaluación de medicamentos y la financiación de los mismos, ¿no? Lo hablábamos hace muy poco en el aula que teníamos con directores generales de farmacia, ¿no? La necesidad de que la innovación llegue al paciente de una manera rápida y sobre todo de una manera rigurosa, ¿no? Entonces, yo creo que estamos en el camino de que eso ocurra, pero todavía hay mucho camino por recorrer para que sea así. Por lo tanto, todo lo que respecta a la evaluación de tecnologías sanitarias y concretamente evaluación económica por el impacto que tienen los fármacos en el sistema, que no es el único impacto, pero es muy importante, pues es importante que sigamos avanzando no solo en el mundo de ahí fuera, sino también en el mundo académico, que será el mundo de ahí fuera dentro de unos años. Y nada, agradecer a David que nos acompañe hoy, porque la verdad es que es un lujo poder contar con él para un tema como este. Muchas gracias.
Y si me permites, ya antes de darle paso al ponente, recordaos, ¿vale?, que la presentación va a ser en inglés y el debate, ¿vale?, 25 minutos y otros 25 minutos de debate que podrán ser preguntas tanto en castellano como en inglés, ¿vale? ¿Se ve? No. El directo. Pero sí se está compartiendo. Sí, vale, sí, y confírmame, Javier, que se ve.
Sí.
Vale,
¿Sí? Ok, muchas gracias, Rubén. Muchas gracias por invitarme y estoy muy placer estar aquí. Como he dicho, Rubén, voy a hablar inglés, pero me presento en español porque para que sepas que si hablo un poco de español, porque con mi acento de London de toda la vida, claro. Igual quiero decir, si tienes cualquier pregunta y quieres hacerlo en inglés o español, pues con mucho Paloma, obviamente da igual, ¿no? Right, okay, so we're going to talk about evaluation and financing of new medicines, hopefully innovative medicines, and thinking especially about uncertainty, about what we do when we're not sure and we don't know. So these are my opinions. They're not the official opinions of any group or other body. I would like to propose that we use what's called the Chatham House guidelines. That means that you can talk about anything that happens here freely, but don't mention names. Don't attribute comments to me personally. And that lets me just speak freely without any restrictions. Okay. So what's the background here? Well, the one of increasingly, not always, but increasingly, new medicines are in very small markets, are being developed for very, very particular diseases, small populations. I put rare-ish because sometimes these are not rare diseases really. They're third line or fourth line treatments for very advanced cancers. So they're not necessarily what you might think of as a rare disease as such. And also the populations are not necessarily that small, but anyway. And also situations where new medicines are often presented as addressing an unmet need. And that is not well defined, and therefore I put it in comments. But this is the context, and often new medicines are presented with a very poor evidence base. In the last year, out of 90 or 93 new medicines, 13 were with conditional authorization by the European Medicines Agency. That means that the evidence is not very well, is not very high quality. Often there's single arm studies with one arm instead of having two arms, short term, and so on. So this gives us a context in which we're having to make decisions with great uncertainty and in very small populations. So there's also, at the same time, there's a lot of changes going on outside, or in the European context and in Spain at national level. There's going to be a new initiative by the European community to have a joint clinical assessment. All the countries are supposed to use a single database of clinical evidence. That will still mean that we're going to need our own national level evaluation as well. We still need that. It's me. Yeah. So in our national level, we call that the EPITA, the Informe de Posicionamiento Terapéutico. That will still be needed, but hopefully it will be done at the European level. With the clinical information will come at the European level. Also in Spain, there's going to be a change to the law which governs the financing of new medicines, called the Ley de Garantías. That's supposed to bring, the objectives are earlier access, better mechanisms to manage uncertainty, and including patients in the decision-making commissions. But this is all for next year and the year after. So that's the context. Rare diseases, high uncertainty, and changes at national European level. So what principles should or could guide us to think about what our national decision-making should be? How should we make decisions given this context? Well, because I'm an academic as well, look at what's the theory tell us? And I borrowed here from Michael Drummond's work on what the principles could be, but these are my interpretations. Well, we're going to talk about these seven items. I want to give you a panorama of how I think the strengths and weaknesses are in Spain with our current EPTA, the current Informe Procedimento Terapeutico, strengths and weakness of the current system, a short diagnosis, and then repeat it, thinking about what we can do to strengthen our decision making in Spain. Well, I'm going through about these 7 items. The first one being the relevance. So our reports, or our health technology assessment report, the EPTA, needs to be relevant to decision making. Now, what does relevant mean? Well, the criteria which govern new medicine evaluation, financing of new medicines are called the ley de garantías, and they give us 7 criteria, 7 dimensions that should be taken into account. That is the law. Tener en cuenta. It doesn't say how. It doesn't say what instruments we should use. It just says tener en cuenta, take account of severity, unmet need, the added clinical benefit and cost effectiveness put together, budget impact, other alternatives if they are at lower prices, and the degree of innovation. They're the 6 criteria, but they're not well defined, they're not standardized at the moment, and we don't have criteria to rank them as relative important, which are most and which are least important in any particular decision making. Other countries do provide us with models. So in France, need and added benefit, these 2 dimensions, are well defined. They have a rank, a grade from 1 to 5, which the French Decision-Making Commission gives to both of these items, need and added benefit. In Germany, they also have a scale of added benefit defined by the Decision-Making Commission. In England, they use something different. They use the incremental cost per quality adjusted life year as their main decision-making criteria. So there are models, and we'll come back to how applicable they might be for Spain. Come back to that. Okay, the second one is about rigor, the scientific rigor of the EPTA, the Informe Procedimento Terapeutico. What is rigor? Well, we can define, philosophic discussion about what is science and what is rationality in the Kantian, method. But let's put down 3 things. First of all, systematic, meaning gathering all the evidence and using it to make a decision. Second thing is synthesis, which means putting this diverse, these different pieces of evidence together in a coherent package you give to your decision maker. And the third thing is uncertainty, measuring uncertainty, quantifying uncertainty, and the different types of uncertainty. So this is data we often have. We often are presented when, because of the way that the European Medicines Agency makes decisions about authorization and commercialization, then we are given this evidence which is often limited. Often we have surrogate variables, meaning intermediate variables, rather than final variables, and I define final variables as only 2. There are only 2 variables, clinical variables, which are of interest to making decisions about financing, and they are survival and quality of life. Nothing else everything else is a surrogate or an intermediate variable. Respuesta clínica, the clinical response, supervivencia libre de progresión, survival free of progression, are all surrogate variables and not relevant decision making. This next thing is short follow-ups. Well, we all want long follow-up, but we want long-term outcomes, but we're given short-term data. We want comparators. We want them to be the right comparator, a comparator which is being used in the current system as the current standards of care, but we give a no comparator or an inappropriate comparator, such as placebo or some other. So we need. So if we don't have what we want, which is here on the left, then this is what. Then we have to have some way of modelling it, at least until we get better data. So we're very good at the moment at this in the EPTA. At the moment, we tend to collect this kind of information. What we want is this information to make decisions, and we don't have it. Third thing is we need people who are experts in the area which they are responsible for. And that means training. That means formación. That means study. So, for example, the current intention is for economic evaluation in all of the EPTA. We don't have that now, but that's the stated aim. Look, how do we get there if we don't have a body of people who can do evaluation economica at the velocity that we need, which is 100 per year? There are 100 approximately 100 EPTAs every year. That's 8 per month. That's quite a lot of work. So we don't have that kind of capacity at the moment in Spain to do that. So what can we do? Well, there are 4 options that I can think of. There are 4 options. One is that we do all the EPTAs in the Ministry of Health, in the Dirección General, in Spain. That's the first option. Second option is some external groups, such as your group, for example. External groups are contracted to do these 100 per year evaluations. A third method is the manufacturer does the economic evaluation, and then we look at it in the Ministry of Health. We review that. A fourth method might be the manufacturer does the evaluation, and then some external group, such as yourselves, then review that and comment on it for its scientific credibility and rigour. Well, I'll leave those 4 options. They're what I think the 4 options are. Which is the best option? We'll think about perhaps in discussion. But we do need some kind of model, I think. Some kind of modelling. As I said before, what we have on the left side was the short-term partial data. What we need are substantial estimates of what's going to happen in long-term, survival, and quality of life. But these are if you look before, these are nothing to do with economics as we understand it as costs. There's no mention here of costs. It's all about the clinical impact. It's all about the long-term health benefits. And that's what we need to model. If we don't have the data, then we need to model. We need to simulate or recreate, estimate what data should have been. And there are techniques such as indirect comparison and network meta-analysis, which are not about economics, they're about clinical modelling. And that's what I think we need to focus on, not necessarily costs. The costs come later. The fourth point, the fourth principle or theoretical principle for health technology assessment is independence. That's a very difficult issue. With all independence, well, we should have all the scientific and technical staff and decision makers should be independent. Independent of what? Independent of 2 things. Independent of political influence, independent of commercial influence. So we'd like everyone who's going to make decisions to be independent of political influence, independent of commercial influence. But nobody is pure, other than the saints and so on. Nobody is free of commercial influence. Nobody is free of political influence. We all read Twitter, and we are in social media, and we work for consultancy firms, and we're involved with industry. We're all involved in that. And if you're in the business, you're part of that. So nobody is pure and sitting on a rock. But we do need to have at least some appearance that some aim that there is political and commercial independence. Do we have that at the moment? Well, if you look at the agency, the Agencia Española de Productos Médicos y Sanitarios, that actually creates the EPTs, they produce them, they're semi-independent of political influence. They are within the Ministry of Health, but separate from it. And they do have quite a lot of influence, of independence from the political system. But it's semi-independent, it's not completely, it's semi. Legally, they're part of the Ministry of Health. The DG, where I work, is part of the Ministry of Health. It's in the same building, so that's not free of political. That's not independent of political influence. That cannot be. And nor the Comisión Interministerial de Precios de Medicamentos, which make decisions about financing, that cannot be free of political influence because they are political appointees. So that this is an objective assessment. Commercial risk. The people who evaluate medicines in the Ministry of Health are also in constant contact with industry. Now that is commercial influence. That does not mean that they are working for the industry, they're working for the Ministry of Health, but they are in contact daily with the industry. So therefore, they have influence from commercial interests who are trying to sell them things. So what's in other countries? Well, nice is now nice. I'm not going to say. You can say it, but I'm not going to say that there should be a Hispanice or anything like that, a Spain version of nice, because there's lots of models, and Spain has its own models of legal and institutional models. And other countries have theirs, and we can think about what people do in other countries, but not just in NICE. We can think about France and Germany and other countries. So, but in NICE, they do have something which is very independent of political influence. Why? Because there is a permanent decision-making committee that has 5-year terms, and they do not change every time the government changes. They're maintained. They have expert members from different sectors of the NHS. It's not just about pharmacy. It's from different sectors of the NHS, patient groups, academia, statisticians, and economists from outside the pharmaceutical world as well. There are clear decision-making criteria. The cost per quality is supreme. Everything else comes after that. And they have transparency in the sense that reasons are explained. Sometimes well, sometimes badly, but reasons are explained for both positive and negative decisions. So, transparency. Now, transparency is, again, a difficult issue because some things have to be confidential. Some negotiations have to be confidential, and we are talking about negotiation. So prices, real prices, cannot be public. I don't think there's a clear way they can be public, because there's the commercial contracts, and it's not going to happen anyway. So at the moment, the EPT have economic evaluations with artificial prices. Well, that is what that is. But at the moment, it doesn't include some clinical information which could be more transparent, such as the EPT does not have a systematic review in it of clinical evidence. It's not there. It doesn't have detailed appendices of all the steps that were taken in order to create that clinical evidence. What was included, what was not included. Why was it not included? Well, that is not explained. There's no modelling. There's a very short paragraph about how models are used, a short paragraph, but other countries have long appendices. If you want to read them, you can read them, but they're 80, 90 pages long, these appendices of modelling and modelling. And there's no detailed justification of positive and negative decisions in the EPT. It's just a very short paragraph of summary, which you can interpret very difficult to interpret. So other countries do have better models for transparency. So France, Germany, England, all, if you go on their web pages, it's all explained in more detail. Timeliness. Now, so we can just comparing France and Spain. So Spain on the left. So what do we have? We start with the information from the European Medicines Agency and the dossier given to the Ministry of Health by the industry. That's the information that's given to us. Then we start negotiating the price. And normally it's based on budget impact and some clinical information that we have. Start negotiating the price. And then we make a decision, taking into account, teniendo en cuenta, the labour guarantees. And then, and this can take a long time. This goes around for several rounds. And then if there's a right of appeal, and it can go back to the start. So the whole thing can take a long time. What do we do with France? Well, I'm not going to say I'm an expert on France, but just talking to people, this is what I understand about France. The same clinical information at the start. Then the HAS, I can't even say in French, something about, anyway, the decision-making body will then make a decision based on that information about clinical need and public health impact, which is called the SAMR, and then the additional clinical benefit, which is called the SAMR. Two things to make a decision on, and that's what they call the decision. It's just a decision about the clinical benefit and the health need of that population. That's what they call the decision. There's one appeal, just one, and then it goes to the health authorities, and the health authorities negotiate the price. So based on that clinical information, health authorities, the health insurers, start negotiating the price with the manufacturer. So all this lengthy negotiation happens after the decision is made. The decision is clinical, not economic. It's a clinical valuation from 1 to 6. Here, this I think is making things very lengthy. So it's an interesting hypothesis as to whether in France, in fact, things are quicker. I think. Okay, the seventh area is a culture of re-evaluation. What is a culture of re-evaluation? Well, it goes back to the same idea of uncertainty. If we have all these, this is the clinical data that is given to us at the start of the, after the commercial authorization by the European Medicines Agency. This is what we get, this is what we want, this is what we need. In fact, it's not what we want, what we need to make financing decisions about whether is there clinical benefit, will that clinical benefit last, etc. What are we comparing to? So if we don't have this, then we need to collect it. And that's what I mean by a culture of re-evaluation. We don't have this when we make a decision, it's not there, so we need to get it. And then we need to make another decision when we get it. So a decision is not made once, a decision must be made when at the start, and then again when we have more data. So what do we have in Spain? Well, we have made advances. We have now Beltamid, past 2 or 3 years, we've had Beltamid, which is a database of clinical evidence. Usually, if I may venture criticism, it is based on payment by results. The idea of Beltamid was originally 2 things: to collect the clinical evidence and implement payment by results schemes, which means that we pay if the patient has a clinical response and don't pay if the patient doesn't have a clinical response. But they are 2 separate things. One is the need for clinical evidence, and the other is how you pay for clinical benefit. They're 2 separate things. We don't tend to use in Spain other options which we could consider, such as only use the medicine in a clinical study. Patient needs the medicine, Well, the patient has to go into a clinical study. No clinical study, no medicine. We don't tend to use that. We could have coverage of evidence generation, meaning we only cover the, we only finance the medicine for a certain period, for 1 year or 2 years. We generate more evidence, and then we make another decision at the end. After 2 years, another decision. But that's that kind of conditional financing we don't usually have. It's not actually in part of the way we make decisions in Australia. So this, I think, is going to be crucial, and think about how we can finance now conditionally, collecting more data and then making decisions again at the end. Okay, so now I'm going to go back over these 7 points quickly though. So why have I got a picture of a crab here? This is a crab. The idea here is while I'm going to tell you little stories very, very quickly. So Carl Sagan, the scientist who died a few years ago, had a story about why in Japan you can find these crabs with the face of a samurai warrior. He says, well, it's because of human interaction. Fishermen pick up the crabs from the seabed. They look at the crab. If it looks scary, they throw it back. But over time, over centuries, we ended up with crabs that look exactly like human faces. They've been selected. So why are we getting medicines that are in very small populations, in very, very poor evidence base? We're selecting them. We're financing those kind of things, and we're not asking the industry with a good price and with good financing conditions to produce widespread benefits for a large population and so on. So we're selecting. We're giving the industry incentives to produce this, and that's fine. But we have to realise there's a whole other sets of other types of medicines that we may also. We're going to think about the joint clinical assessments. It promises joined up thinking between the regulator, the European Medicines Agency, and the people who make decisions about financing, which are the national ministries. It promises that, but whether we'll get it, we'll see. Yeah, just now I'll just go on to some quick thoughts about each of those points. Okay, so I think the first thing is any criteria that we think of for finance medicine. So those criteria should be defined. So things like what does clinical need mean? What does added clinical benefit mean? In France, they have a very clear idea what that means. Very, very clear. In England, they define that by the quality. Both of those things, clinical need and added clinical benefit, those two things are defined by the quality. In Spain, we don't have that clear. It's very much discretional. But I think that's one of the things we need to think about. And we need to measure, using the EPTA, we need to measure the performance of the medicine against each of those criteria using some kind of rigorous and quantified way. It's common for all pathologies, because that's what we mean by financing. When we finance something, we're saying we're going to prioritise this, and not financing means we're going to leave it. So we're selecting for all pathologies, not just for cancer and specific ones, but they have to have the same criteria for all of them. Otherwise, it's not fair. So second thing is the modelling, and we need to think about modelling as being something which tells us about the clinical benefits, even though we're uncertain about it. So there are two schools of thought about what modelling is for. Some people say you can only model when you've got very, very good data. When I've got the data just how I want it, very, very good quality data, then I'll start modelling. And my view is no. A model is when you haven't got good data, then you need to make estimates. It's the other way around. You only need, if you had perfect data, you wouldn't need a model because you have everything to hand. You have everything in front of you. The model is about an understanding uncertainty. So we need to think about appropriate methodologies to express and measure the uncertainty that in our evidence. So we do have these methodologies somewhat, but we think we need to think more about how we're going to use them in decision making. So things like matching techniques, propensity score matching, modelling from short-term outcomes to final outcomes, which are overall survival and health-related quality of life. I think they are the final outcomes. We need to think about absolute risk differences, not relative risk. We think about how we're going to, what's the correlate, we have surrogate outcomes, what is the relationship with final outcomes, with survival and quality of life. We need to forget about medians, they're completely useless, and think about means, and that means extrapolation. So if we have short-term data, we know 50% of the patients die, 50% survive about 2 years, that's called the median. That's no good. The mean, the average survival, that means extrapolating the curve and calculating the area underneath it. It's a basic modelling technique, but that's what we're looking for. So how do we do that? Well, we need personnel, we need trained people, we need people like you. We need people like you in the right places, doing the right jobs at the right time. We need to invest in people like you to work in both the public administration and in the industry. And why do I say that? Because the industry does have very highly qualified people working in them, but need to think need to think of it as a kind of game, kind of economics game, a kind of game theory game, where we know what you know, and therefore we will give you. We know what you want, and therefore we will give you what you want, because that will make our lives easier. So in the industry, we need to have people who are thinking about modelling methods and how to make attractive and how to make understandable decision makers in Spain. And the industry needs to do that because they have the data. You can only do propensity score matching if you have individual patient data, and the industry have that data. So they must do that work. They must see. All the other thing the industry has to do, and people in the industry need to be trained in order to how to do it, is present a convincing plan for generating data when the data at the time of the submission are partial, short-term, the wrong outcomes, the wrong patients, and so on. How are we going to generate that new data? Give us the plan, and then we'll finance provisionally, conditionally. The third thing is independence. Well, my personal view is, just a personal view, is that the scientific evidence and the economic evaluation should be undertaken by independent bodies, independent groups. Now, whether that's how that is done is an interesting question, is a difficult question, but independent groups. We should be thinking about using in my view, the Commission Interministerial should also be independent. So permanent members who are not necessarily political appointees, should be taken from a wider range of interest groups, not just from pharmacy in the community of polymers and so on. But that's all that is just a wishful thinking. I mean, that's not just me wishing. That has no official data. Price negotiation. Where should it be done? Should it be done an early stage or after we have all the clinical evidence at hand? In my view, it should be done at a later stage. First of all, we make a clinical evaluation. We position the therapy in its both within its population and compared to other competitor therapies or best practice or whatever, or palliative care. Position the therapy, and then negotiate the price. Not the other way. We do that now the other way around. First we negotiate the price, and then we position them, and then we position. So we should be rethinking where and how price negotiation should be done. I think it should be done outside the ministry, personally, but that's another question. We should, we could do it quicker. We could be much quicker about this. We could ask the industry to make us their final offer. Just give us one offer. We'll accept it, reject it. If we reject it, you get one appeal, and back to the start, and that's it. At the moment, we go round and round in circles with the offers. So that could be much more streamlined, and we can make everything much quicker. There's transparency. The default should be to publish, and only certain things which are very sensitive we don't publish, rather than being selective. So we should publish everything, unless there are good reasons not to. We could, again, as I said before, perhaps we can be quicker, we could be more timely by thinking about this process comparing to maybe to France or to other and especially this culture of re-evaluation, carefully thinking about what uncertainty we have. Where is the uncertainty in the clinical evidence? Is it surrogate outcomes? Is it short follow-up? Is it lack of comparator? Is it all of them? Or is it just one of these things? We should think about conditional financing. If we have one of these problems here, then we finance while we gather for further evidence and then make another decision. We think about the type of follow-up study we need. So if we're going to ask for more evidence, exactly what do we mean? Exactly how long will the study be? What patient groups? What will be the comparators? And so on. Exactly what. And it's not realistic for me to say to industry, you have to do more study, and you have to pay for this. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen, and it's not going to be acceptable. But the industry needs to give the decision maker the plan. The industry has to tell the decision maker how they're going to address these problems, because they are going to, in the end, assume a cost. It could be done within Valtamate. That's one way of collecting final outcomes. If the problem is there's no comparator group, Valtamate can't help. So it needs to be realistic, thinking about the source of the reason why there's uncertainty. And a separate issue to me, is payment by results. When you pay for a clinical result and don't pay for another patient, you pay for some patients, not for others. That's separate. How you pay and how it is different from gathering evidence. First, think about gathering evidence, and then thinking about how we're going to pay. Because sometimes just a discount, if there's a lot of uncertainty, a discount can make all the difference. Just say, well, there's a lot of uncertainty, so we're going to have a low price, and when there's more data, we'll pay a higher price. That might work, for example, rather than having a complicated payment by results arrangement or agreement. Okay. Okay, so just quote. Yeah, so this quote, believe that we know what we're doing here. So he likes these kind of things. But so there's things we know, and we're quite good at listing out the things, the data that we know. We're quite good at saying what we don't know, but we're not so good at saying what we're not sure about. we're not so good at saying we're not sure about, and we're not so good at saying what we need to do in order to be more certain in the future. So those two things are what my presentation is about. What we're not sure about, what we know what we know what we don't know, but we're not good at saying what we're not sure about, and we need to think about how we're going to be more sure, more certain. Okay, that's me. So, yeah.
Thank you, David. Si os parece bien, vamos con el turno de preguntas, ¿vale? No sé si alguno quiere hacer alguna pregunta desde aquí. Si no, comienzo yo. Algunas que han llegado, ¿vale? Maybe, how can we disentangle the external influence of the budget impact since the budget is limited?
Yeah, thanks. What's your name, sorry?
Javier.
Javier, hi. Hi. Yeah, the budget impact. Yeah, it's, first of all, why do we need to know the budget impact? I ask this as a naive question, not to you, but not even to this room, to the world. And I'm not really sure why. The budget impact, often you read many papers and you speak to people all everywhere, and they say the budget impact is very important. And I do not understand what that means. Is 3 million euros a year a large amount of money or not? Is 300 million a lot? 3,000 million? These are just numbers. They have no context. And numbers without context are just that, just numbers. I understand what a cost per quality is, and I understand how it can be compared with a benchmark to say whether an innovation is efficient and should be financed. I understand that. I understand how you can calculate a threshold, but I don't understand how you can calculate a threshold for budget impact. I don't understand when everybody says, I think it's just me. I think it's just, I don't know. I think it's just me, because, or my head is not clear enough. I can't understand what budget impact is for. So, my view is the budget impact is useful for people working in hospitals, so they can manage their annual financing. I understand that. So once it's been approved. Once a medicine has been approved at national level, you can, then hospitals need to know, well, this is going to cost me, this much a year and so on. I understand that, but that's not what we calculate.
Probably it is the same for autonomous regions, because they also manage a budget.
But we don't calculate it by autonomous region.
Yeah, but they participate at the national level in the decision making, so they need have some tools in order to evaluate the impact that this drug will have in their budget.
But that's not what we calculate. So so I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Now that will be useful. So the community can calculate for the prices that they can negotiate what would be the budget impact in their community and what they need. And then of course the question is what has to be displaced in order to meet that budget impact. And that is the question to me. It's not the cost, it's the opportunity cost. So the tool is what has to be displaced in order to meet that obligation to finance X, whatever X is, whatever X medicine is. So this displacement is what is normally captured in the cost per quality, because that is the other health that will not be financed because
Muy buenas.
we approved.
Inés, soy médico. Ya lo tiene tu madre. ¿Vale? Te digo para que...
Switch off the microphone.
So you can continue. Yeah.
It's a partito from Teams.
Yeah, you can continue. Silence everything now.
Okay.
So another.
I would say, yeah. So yeah, go on. Carry on.
No, I think that's correct. Probably what we should measure is the cost of opportunity of financing the one thing against the things you stop
To stop it.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's yeah, and that should be done. If that's going to be done, if that's at real prices, not sort of fictional. I would say so. I would start from the point of view: is there a clinical benefit, which we don't say at the moment? What is the clinical benefit on a scale, a common scale you can measure against all pathologies? Start with: is there a clinical benefit? Is it in principle efficient? It's cost per quality, and then budget impact in the sense of what will be displaced if we finance this. And then you have to take a long enough time horizon. So this 3-year budget impact idea, I don't see if that captures. I mean, 3 years. What's 3 years? Is it the particular lecture up?
Yeah.
See, so this kind of thing drives me a little bit crazy actually. This kind of short-term thinking, just in terms of absolute costs, not thinking about clinical benefit, not thinking about the long-term impact.
That's
Not thinking
precisely
about what's displaced.
that's precisely why it is important to that the re-evaluation phase that you stated in your presentation, because otherwise you won't be able to see what you can withdraw from the system in order to introduce innovation.
Yeah. You've got to be able to withdraw. So it's not just saying yes and no. It's got to be a point where you can say, we've tried this. It's not giving us the performance that we need. We're going to withdraw it and move on to something else. But that's very, people don't like the idea of withdrawing. They see it as being taking things away, which they don't like that idea. So that's a part of the idea. Well, to sell the idea to the hospital management community or healthcare management.
Okay, so I will continue with another question from the chat. Okay, they ask us if the difference between timelines from France and Spain depend on the healthcare system. Is there any influence?
Do you mean? I think the question points probably about the timelines being the time from marketing approval to decision being made about financing. I guess that's.
I think so. Yeah.
That is the time that we're talking about here. And I'm afraid there has been actually some work done on this. So I haven't got it to hand. So there are papers about time to decision. I think that's as I wanted to say here. It depends what we mean by decision, because of course in France decisions are about decision made by HAS is there a clinical benefit? That's what they call the decision. In other words, what we should be doing in the EPT. That is their decision, and it has a legal force. So if a medicine has a poor assessment of added clinical benefit, then they will not be able to get a higher price than current options. And the they only get a good premium price if they have very, very high clinical benefit, added clinical benefit. And that's very difficult to achieve in France. That's very, very difficult. So they're very, very clear criteria and very rigorous criteria about what added clinical benefit means. That wasn't the question. But yeah, the question is it fast? Are things faster in France? My hypothesis is probably yes, but they finance everything in France. The question is what price? They finance everything, and the question is the price compared to the current options. Yeah, so they have a very clear idea what they mean by added clinical benefit.
Okay. Any questions here?
Sí, quería comentar, bueno, gracias por la presentación, está muy bien, me he mencionado alguna vez. Comparto totalmente contigo la idea de que necesitamos mecanismos de financiación condicionales, como has dicho antes. Claro, pero tenemos por otro lado la legislación española. ¿Qué se puede hacer?
No, la legislación española sí. No contempla precisamente el concepto de financiación condicional. Pero, dicho esto, se puede financiar con una cláusula que dice, pues, se revisará el precio con determinadas situaciones.
Eso no es financiación condicional, eso es que revisamos los precios en función de las ventas.
Yeah.
Lo ideal sería lo que tú has dicho.
Lo ideal sería lo que he dicho, sí.
Dar política real, continuar recolectando
Yeah.
y después decidimos si sigues o no sigues.
Yeah.
Eso con la legislación.
Actualmente no se contempla exactamente tal y como he dicho en la legislación ni en la práctica, habitual. En principio, Galtmed dice cuando estableció Galtmed, pues cuando haya suficiente datos, revisaremos algo. Pero no dicho tan contundente, ¿no? No dicho que revisamos las condiciones de financiación. Dicho, revisamos, vamos a hacer más evaluación. Pero no, yo digo, sí, evaluación, pero ¿con qué fin? ¿Con qué objetivo? Es como hacer un prueba diagnóstico. Si el prueba diagnóstico no cambia la evolución del tratamiento, ¿de qué sirve? ¿De qué sirve un prueba? Mi hermano es médico y él dice, hacemos pruebas por si acaso. No, por si acaso no.
Esa es la gente.
Pues estamos de acuerdo, sí. El mundo fuera hasta.
Again, a question from the chat. Would it be better to move the decision process to a European level instead of the regional one?
At the moment, that's what is under what's actually been approved by the European Commission, and it will happen, is this idea of joint clinical assessment. And that has been strictly limited. If you read it carefully, you see that it has strictly there will be no positive or negative valuations of clinical benefit. There won't be any ranking of options. So that document will not say that medicine A is better than the medicine B or equivalent to medicine B or anything like that. It will just say there's option A and there's option B and this is the data. And that's as far as they can go, because there's a principle in the European community of healthcare decisions are the competence of the nations. In Spain, we have another principle, which is that healthcare decisions are the competence of the community autonomous. So we have another level, and then we have the hospitals and the underneath them. So we have a quite even more complex system in Spain. But I don't think it's. I mean, I don't think it's going to be any willingness to have decisions about financing healthcare made at European level. That's simply not going to happen. But hopefully, the joint clinical assessment will be an advance. It will stop. It will help avoid duplication. I think. But every country does their own scientific evaluation. It might even help the idea of indirect comparisons, where we look. They are thinking about methodologies for making indirect comparisons, sort of propensity score matching, that kind of thing. So they are. I think it will be an advance, but a very small advance on what we have.
That would be an additional step in the process, right?
It is an additional step, and it is only a benefit if that means that those same steps are not repeated at national level. So that it can only be an advance. It can only be better if at national level we will take what the European level have done and then work on it with very strict and very rigorous criteria, and not try and repeat it all again. Yeah, hopefully.
Another one. Estás en español. Te felicitan por la ponencia y nos preguntan si ahora un medicamento con un ensayo clínico en fase 2 no se financia por incertidumbre de eficacia, ¿cómo se va a considerar la evidencia de un estudio observacional que no es un ensayo clínico con resultados en vida real? ¿Serán este tipo de estudios post autorización los que ofrezcan mejor evidencia que un ensayo clínico? ¿Cómo se va a tomar decisiones entonces?
Yeah. Si no se financia con un estudio fase 2, no se financia. Es decir, no se puede usar en España. Bueno, en uso compasivo sí, pero de forma habitual no se puede usar. Y luego, la pregunta es, si no se financia, ¿cómo vamos a recoger la evidencia? Es decir, ¿quién va a recoger la evidencia que hemos dicho que falta? Bueno, es una paradoja que se llama Catch-22 en una novela inglesa o americana, que si no se puede hacer nada porque hay dos como estás como el burro que no, con paja ahí no sabe dónde ir. Bueno, dicho esto, España no es el único país, entonces si no se financia en España, en otros países probablemente sí, entonces sí van a empezar a recoger más evidencia. Y la evidencia del real world, también no me gusta mucho el nombre. No me gustan muchas cosas, claro. Pero no me gusta, el nombre real world evidence, ¿qué quiere decir? Que es algo diferente o mejor a evidencia requerida del ensayo. ¿Qué es un ensayo? Ensayo también es el real world, son pacientes reales en un ensayo, pero se recogen la evidencia según algún protocolo. Y es muy importante recoger evidencia según algún protocolo. Siempre los datos no se generan solos. Siempre alguien tiene que recoger los datos y preguntas cómo se recogen los datos. ¿Quién va a hacerlo? ¿Qué condiciones? ¿Qué pacientes? Etcétera. Ese es un protocolo. Pues todos los estudios tienen su protocolo. Incluso los bases de datos administrativos tienen su protocolo. Entonces, hay que entender cuál es el protocolo. Cada uno es diferente. Entonces, yo admitiría datos que no son de ensayo clínico, es decir, que he dicho real world evidence, pero datos que no proceden de ensayos clínicos aleatorios, sí, no admitiría. Pero hay que revisar cuál ha sido el método de generar estos datos. quién son los pacientes, de dónde son, cuáles han sido los resultados, cómo se miden los resultados, quién va a medirlo, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces, es parte de la evaluación de estos datos. Es muy importante tener en cuenta que todos los datos son real world. Todos.
Another one, what do you think about a temporary financiation, for example, for 1 year, and then the obligation of presenting some results in real practice to continue with that financing?
Yeah. Yes. When there's lots of evidence, when there's a lot of uncertainty, I think it's very good. But there's a couple of, there's one or two problems. One is, como dicho, the legislación española doesn't really allow it at the moment, but that can change. Well, it can change once every 15 years. The other thing is, if you say yes to something, even if provisionally, that yes tends to become fossilized, tends to become set, and so it's very difficult to then say, actually no. So if I say, if I give a mobile to my 12-year-old daughter and say, well, you can use it for a year and then we'll see. Well, in a year's time, when I try and take, I will not be able to extract that mobile from her hands, not even for 1 minute. I know that. So there's no conditional financing for that mobile for a 12-year-old. Once it is in use, it is in use forever. And the same with medicines, or the people that once it becomes part of the system, it's very difficult to then say no. So that's a big risk with conditional financing. And somehow you have to have a clear agreement about how it's going to terminate, if it has to terminate.
Another question?
David, thank you very much for the presentation. I have one question about how can we disentangle the uncertainty problems, because the discount rate, for example, we do a health economics evaluation, we consider about from 0 to 3 or 5%, but the problem now is the inflation rate, for example, is over 10% in Spain and more European countries, for example, UK. So how can we introduce or consider to expand the scenarios in order to implement the economic evaluation? And I have another question. Maybe, for example, the difference between the French system and the Spanish system, our preference for the budget impact is because we have as the National Health Service in Britain, for example, they received a report about 50 years ago.
Yeah, it starts.
So yeah, it starts. But the point is that, for example, in Spain and UK, is the budget impact, because in the National Health Service system, this is the reference, because we have, for example, payments, fixed payments, but for example, we don't have saving payments in Spain, for example, for drugs for oncology or something like that. So I think that this is the difference between the France, the German system, with the Spanish system. I don't know exactly what is your view.
Yeah. Okay. The discount rate, I think, is a fantastic question. I mean, for economists to work on. I mean, it's very relevant. It has an actual practical consequence, because for many years, you said the rate of interest has been 0 or whatever, so no one notices, and now, as you say, in theory, the discount rate is related to the interest rate, the cost of capital. And I would say it's related to something else. It's related to what we I think it's about opportunity cost, the discount rate, and it's the question should be in our minds anyway, as economists, what else could we do with money if we didn't spend it on the health service? So we always think, what we think of opportunity cost as being, well, if we finance this drug, we can't finance that healthcare. But actually, we could say instead of financing health, we take money from somewhere else, from education, or from defence, or from social services. So that should be that is what the discount rate, I think, should be thinking about. Is what else could we spend our money on? How much is health worth to us compared to education or other public services? So it's not. So perhaps that should be for me. That should be the question. Not so much, money. Not so much about money. As such. Okay. The other thing was about. I've just forgotten a tiny bit. The one that. Just tell me again the words. The second question. Just
about the budget impact. The difference between the national service system and
the co-payment. The role of the co-payment in the budget. The co-payment. In France. Well, in France, as far as I understand it, there are co-payments, but everyone has their own private insurance. So there are high co-payments in France, but everyone has a private insurance, and that pays the co-payment. So it's like, well, we don't have co-payments because we have health insurance. So that's all happened. So yeah, and yeah, you can't compare money values across countries so easily. Yeah, I think that's just a limitation of trying to compare money values, because there are institutional differences, which means that it's very hard to compare. I agree.
And maybe, for example, I think that one of the differences between the Spanish national health system and other systems is because, for example, if autonomous community in Spain introduce, for example, an innovation, for example, a new vaccines, or the point is that other autonomous communities, for example, are forced to imitate, just in competition, So this is the point of the difference.
The dynamic, yeah.
The dynamic in this kind of models.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah. And I guess it does. It sounds quite likely. Yeah, I mean, in theory, yeah. I mean, having lots of different autonomous communities, it lets us experiment. Yeah, one of the good things about having autonomous communities is it does let us experiment. Now, that's only good if then there's a good evaluation of that experiment, and then we say, it worked or it didn't work in Catalonia or Cantabria, and so that is a reference point for the rest of Spain. I mean, it shouldn't just be, we've got this big machine in Catalonia, so we need the same big machine, in Girona, another one in, I don't know, in La Rioja. And no, I mean that's crazy, isn't it? But but it should be, well, we use the diversity to innovate and evaluate. Yeah.
Okay, another question. Considering that the number of rare diseases patients is lower than patients with other kind of diseases, how efficient is innovation in rare diseases?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yeah, complicated question, isn't it? First of all, are rare diseases rare? I don't remember the exact number. I think it's 1 person in 10 has a rare disease at the moment. What does that mean? It means that we're inventing rare diseases. Day by day, there's a new rare disease being invented. In fact, if you have something which is not so rare, like multiple myeloma multiplex, kind of blood cancer, it's not so rare. But if you're in if you failed with 3 or 4 previous therapies, there's only about 100 patients in Spain each year who are in that category, and suddenly that becomes a rare disease. That has the label of rare disease. Well, it's not really rare. It's just that's just clinical reality. You know, patients. A lot of people die before they get there, the third, fourth stage. A lot of people, you know, they don't. They just get their drug work, their therapy works, and the cancer doesn't get to advanced stage. So that's not really a rare disease. That's just small patient numbers. So it's partly the criteria that the European Medicines Agency seem to me, and without being an expert in rare diseases or anything, just seem to be very liberal about allowing confusing small patient numbers with rare diseases, and not distinguishing between rare disease and very rare diseases of the type which, you know, only gene therapies or very specific therapies can cure. So, you know, so I think we need to think about ultra rare diseases and in very defined patient groups, not just, to me, just advanced stage cancers which have, you know, patients failed 3 or 4 therapies on. That's first about rare diseases, because we're getting to a point where, as you saw with the crabs, if you pay high prices for something, if you let some things survive, then more of those things will be produced, and that's what we're seeing in innovation. We're giving the signal to the industry, not we, Spain, the world is giving a signal to industry that this is what we want. We're paying high prices, and we're going to give you easy access. It's all going to be very, you know, very profitable. And that's where the industry is going, and not going towards, you know, Alzheimer and heart disease and so on, which are the big killers or the big things which influence, you know, thousands and thousands of people, or not to mention, of course, developing countries' diseases, which is another issue. So we're not, because they don't pay high prices, and it's difficult to get approval and so on. Well, that's not very attractive if you want to, you know, if you're a commercial company. So there's lots of theories of innovation, of course, you know, how innovation is produced and why it's produced, but, you know, that's one thing to think about. So I think we need to just rethink a bit what we mean by unmet need. Define, in Spain we can only control what we do in Spain, we can't control the world. But we can control what we mean by rare disease, we can control how much we're going to pay for rare disease therapies, we can control what we define as unmet need. What do we mean when we say unmet need? What are the criteria? How do we compare with other pathologies? Compare unmet need, because we think about survival and quality of life. They're both about unmet need. So we need to just be clear about what we want to pay for and what we want the industry to give us. What are our priorities? And I think so. Yeah, that's quite a lot of work. That's not easy. Yeah.
Another question here. Okay, another one about the different decision processes that are in the European level or even in Spain. Do you think that this heterogeneity can lead to a reduction in the equity in the access to some technology or treatment?
So say the question again. Sorry, just repeat, please.
Yeah, the heterogeneity in the decision process between regions. Okay, if this can lead to a reduction in the equity in the access to some technology.
Well, I'm not really the right person to ask. I don't really know what happens in regions. I mean, it would seem that that it's quite possible. There's a lot of re-evaluation going on. There's a lot of duplication going on. There's hospital or pharmacy boards which, you know, decide whether they're going to use something or not use something. The data tells us there's a lot of regional differences. Whether that is inequality, I don't know. Inequality is about whether we think those differences are justified in any way. So I think it's something to keep an eye on, to look at. I can't really answer if If it's important to patients, I'm not sure.
Question? Okay, so I think there is nothing more in the chat. There's nothing, no more questions, okay? So, bueno, pues muchas gracias por haber venido, ¿de acuerdo? Por tu ponencia, que ha sido fantástica. Era un debate muy interesante. Y, bueno, no sé si hay alguien más que decir algo. Si no, con esto cerraríamos, ¿de acuerdo? El próximo seminario será el día 19 de diciembre con Beatriz Rodríguez.
¿Cambio de hora? ¿Será en la 1?
A la 1, sí.
Un poco más las fechas, ¿no? Cercanas a Navidad. Así que, bueno, adelantamos un poquito.
Y nada, gracias a las 50 personas que nos habéis seguido, tanto por aquí presencialmente, que habéis venido con este tiempo que hace, y a las que estáis en casa o donde estéis, ¿vale? Así que nada, muchas gracias.